Hi, and welcome to Tom Kennedy Science, and I'm your host, Dr. Tom Kennedy. Now today is part 3 of my series on eukaryotic cells. What we're going to talk about is the cytoskeleton. So far we've done the evolution and origins of eukaryotes, we've done the endomembrane system, and now let's talk about the cytoskeleton. You know, these eukaryotic cells, like you and I, they have a skeleton. Now our skeleton is rigid and stays in place throughout our entire life. But it's more dynamic than you realize. And when it comes to the eukaryotic cytoskeleton, this is an incredibly dynamic system of proteins, and there's 3 different types. And they're important. I mean, they do all kinds of things for these cells. And in fact, I love this images of these dyed cells. And you can see the cytoskeleton dyed in greens, reds, and blues. And you start realizing, wow, there's a lot more to these cells than we realize, right? So let's dive right in and talk about the 3 components of the cytoskeleton and what each one of these does. And then, of course, you know I'm going to finish on why we care. So you've got a eukaryotic cell, right? And they're much larger and more complex than prokaryotes. So you need this cytoskeleton to help organize the internal parts of the cell. So it helps organize the organelles. It can move them around. It can help the cell move itself. It can help the cell do phagocytosis, engulfing other cells and eating them. Okay? And it's important for cell division as well. So the cytoskeleton here, as you can see, has a lot of different functions in addition to just maintaining the cell's integrity. So the first one are the microfilaments. Micro means small. And then we also call them actin filaments as well, because they're named after the actin fibers. I know, microfilaments, actin filaments, using different names for the same thing. It sounds like Lord of the Rings. I mean, just think, Gandalf the Grey, right? Is that Gandalf the Grey or Gandalf the White? Actually, 2 different people, kind of the same thing. You know, in Gandalf, he's also called a Lauren or a Stormcrow as well. And then in the Return of the King, he comes back as Gandalf the White. He started off as Gandalf the Grey. See, we're not that complicated here. See, we're simpler than Lord of the Rings. We just have microfilaments, and actin filaments are the same thing. And the name actin filaments comes from the fact that they're made up of actin, which is a protein used to make these. Now, actin filaments are the smallest part of the cytoskeleton, and they're dyed here in green. Now, actin filaments are like rope. You can pull with a rope. You can't push with a rope. So actin filaments, they're also modular. Now my skeleton's here every day of my life, right? And it will be from the time I was born to the time I die. Actin filaments are modular. Now they can be more or less permanent structures of the cell, okay? But the cell can also build them up and break them down as they need them. So actin filaments are also important for things like cytoplasmic streaming. As you can see in this video, those chloroplasts are slowly moving around the cell. And what's happening is there's actin filaments near the edge of the cell wall. And the chloroplasts have little motor proteins on them, and it's walking them down like that, down these actin filaments. And through cytoplasmic streaming, the cell can move these organelles around. Specifically, they can move the chloroplasts around to maximize photosynthesis. Now, actin filaments are also important in muscle contractions. You see, every movement you make is caused by a muscle cell contracting, getting shorter. And the way it does that is you've got these actin filaments and you've got the myosin heads that slide past them and walk down them and cause these filaments to shorten. And that, of course, causes the shortening of the muscle and movement. And, you know, that was me back in the day. I'm not going to say how long ago that was, but I was deadlifting. I think that was a little over 500 pounds. I wish they would have had 545s on there rather than, you know, the 100-pound plates, but what can you say? But that's actin filaments that are involved with muscle contraction. And in fact, interestingly, all animals move by using muscles. And in fact, muscular system coordinated by a nervous system is a defining character of animals. Now, the second type of cytoskeletal element are the keratin fibers. They're a class of proteins, and unlike actin filaments, these are more or less permanent structures of the cell, and you can see them dyed here in red. Now, keratin fibers, like I said, they're made up of different types of proteins, but they form hair, nails, and horns. And like I said, they're very important for giving cells rigidity. And they're not very modular. They're more or less permanent structures of the cell. Next, we have the microtubules. The microtubules, like actin filaments, are modular. The cell can build them up and take them back down again. So we would say the cell can polymerize them. Poly means many, right? So if I'm polymerizing something, I'm making it. So if I have all my Lego pieces and I make a Millennium Falcon, I'm polymerizing my Millennium Falcon. And then they can depolymerize them. They can take them down. Depolymerization means I take my Millennium Falcon and I take it apart. I can take my microtubules apart. Wait, am I obsessed with a Lego Millennium Falcon? Absolutely. I can't help it. Now, the microtubules, they can be in a cell for a very long time, but like I said, the cell can actually build them up and take them down as needed. One thing that's important is they form cilia and flagella. You can see this little protist. It's got little cilia beating back and forth, and it's rotating the water around it so it can feed. And that's pretty cool that the microtubules are involved with the cilia here. They're also involved with flagella. You can see this is a sperm cell. Sperm cell is nothing more than basically a cell nucleus with a long tail and some mitochondria at the base of it to give it power to move. Because all animals have flagellated sperm. All animal sperms swim to the egg, even in humans. And the reason why they all swim to the egg, animals evolved in water, so they would have to swim to the egg. So after 375 million years of living on land, this is the tetrapods. Tetra means four, pod means foot, all, reptiles, amphibians, mammals. We haven't been around that long. But our ancestors came out 375 million years ago, and our sperm still swim to the egg using a flagella. Goes back to our fish ancestors. I know, fish ancestors. I'm promising you, we have fish ancestors. Microtubules are also very important for cell division. The microtubules, what they do is the cell will grow microtubules prior to cell division called mitosis, and they latch onto the chromosomes, which is all our DNA condensed, move them around to the middle part of the cell, and then pull them apart inside the cell. So we're building the microtubules up and we're taking them down during mitosis. This is how you can start to see that the microtubules are not permanent structures inside the cell. So this is where I want to take time to talk about, why do we care about the cytoskeleton? For me, I think an obvious answer is knowing how muscles work is important, but let's talk about something a little bit more sad, cancer. Cancer has affected almost every one of us in some ways. How many of us have known somebody that's had cancer or died from cancer? Well, cancer is our cells that have become damaged and they begin to grow uncontrollably through cell division. So one way that we might be able to treat cancer is to stop cell division. One way we can stop cell division is by specifically targeting the microtubules. And in fact, certain chemotherapy drugs prevent microtubules from being able to come apart, and this basically stops the cell in the middle of cell division. It can't complete it, and the cells die. And unfortunately, a lot of these drugs target our entire body all at once and stops like cell division everywhere. Our skin, our hair, our intestines. That's why people on chemo feel bad. That's why we lose our hair. But hey, we can stop the cancer cells from dividing, and then we can hit them with some radiation and kill them, right? So that's why we have chemotherapy. And in fact, a lot of newer chemotherapy is trying to target cancer cells specifically. So studying how microtubules are formed inside the cell and how the cell directs their activities is incredibly important for developing new treatments for cancer. All right, so I hope you got that. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning about the cytoskeleton. This has been another episode of Tom Kennedy Science.